Here's an interesting. Here's some tech hopium, guys. This is from a guy named Mike Hudema. These cheaper, smaller wind turbines can produce 10 times more power than the traditional ones. If you guys are into this kind of stuff, what's cool about these wind turbines is that they're not nearly as big as these guys. They're very small, and they actually become more productive when they're closer together. I don't really know what the science is behind this or how this works, but and they're like, what is it? I think they said 10 times more powerful than the traditional wind turbines that are put up. So these are small, these are portable. You can use them in conjunction with each other, close together. They actually become more productive when they're close to each other. So they're called vertical axis wind turbines. I don't know if you guys can see this. Anyways, there seems to be a bit of debate whether they're actually more efficient. Anyways, for anybody who's into that kind of thing, more little tiny tidbits of good news among the bad news. France is going big on bikes. This is from Mike Udema again. France is going big on bikes, investing over $350 million on new bike paths along the range of other pedal-friendly initiatives. So they're trying to encourage people in France to ride more bikes. It wants to be more like the Netherlands, where 30% of all trips are by bike. In France, it's 3% because cycling is seen as a sport. So that's cool. They're trying to change people's minds about how to get around or how to transport themselves. Very little things. And it's the little things. TCR Galaxy, Tim Garrett says efficiencies won't reduce emissions. Yeah. Random variable says the fossil fuel industry knows we can get off oil and quickly. You're right. Anyways, let's keep moving. And the little tiny green tech things keep coming forward, but this is more in line with the reality around here's what it is. Green economic growth is a myth. Excuse me. This is from Vice by Nafiz Ahmed. It's the economic growth part. So green, using renewable energy actually is real. It actually exists. It's the thing is the only way it's actually going to work or help anybody is if the economic growth part goes away. It's the growth part. It's the continuing to live in the society that we live in. So like those newfangled wind turbines are pretty cool. I like them. They're pretty neat. The only way they're really going to help us is if we take down the whole burning of fossil fuel thing, or take the whole economic growth thing down, or take the whole consumer culture thing down, or take the whole non-essential items thing down. So that thing has to go away in order for green to actually help anybody. And few people think that it can, but we'll see. There are no realistic scenarios to make the economic growth demanded by capitalism compatible with a safe climate, researchers who advised the United Nations found. I'm going to read that again. There are no realistic scenarios, quote unquote, to make the economic growth demanded by capitalism compatible with a safe climate, researchers who advised the United Nations found. As societies get richer, they consume more resources. That also means they generate more pollution, driving climate change and destroying natural ecosystems. We need to somehow break this link between material wealth and environmental catastrophe. That's why financial institutions and governments have been focused on the idea of decoupling GDP growth from resource use. Yes. The idea of decoupling is driven by the recognition that to stay within the safe limit, hardy har har, of 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have to dramatically reduce our material consumption of Earth's resources. The assumption is that it is possible. Hold on one second. Let me see what the date is on this. Oh, this is from July 16th. So it's current. The assumption that it is possible to continue growing the global economy while reducing our actual resource use and material footprint, perhaps by shifting to renewable energy. This notion has been most recently articulated in the book More from Less, The Surprising Story of How We Learn to Prosper Using Fewer Resources and What Happens Next by Andrew McAfee, principal research scientist at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Financial and other data, McAfee argued, shows we can actually easily reduce our material footprint while continuing to grow our economies in a win-win scenario. But new scientific analysis by a group of systems scientists and economists who have advised the United Nations seems to pull out the rug out from under the entire enterprise. The new research indicates that conventional approach is based on selective readings of statistical data. McAfee argues, for instance, that we are increasing wealth, the productivity motor of capitalism. As we are increasing wealth, the productivity motor of capitalism is driving us to greater heights of efficiency due to better technologies. This means we are able to make stuff faster and smaller using less materials and in some cases less energy. And that in turn implies we are causing less pollution. The problem is that this story, according to the new research, ignores how greater efficiency in certain regions or sectors is not slowing down the overall consumption machine. If you guys remember the chart I showed you yesterday about the burning of fossil fuels, as renewable technologies goes up, fossil fuels double, triple, and sometimes quadruple. Within the wider system, these efficiencies are enabling us to consume even greater quantities of resources overall. That's why decades of data on material flows confirm that there are no realistic scenarios for such decoupling of economic growth from resource use. Combing through 179 of the best studies of this issue from 1990 to 2019 further reveals no evidence that any meaningful decoupling has ever taken place. The goal of decoupling rests partly on faith, conclude the team from the BIOS Research Institute in Finland, an independent, multidisciplinary scientific organization studying the effects of environmental and resource factors on the economy, politics, and culture. The BIOS team previously advised the UN Global Sustainable Development Report on the risk that endless economic growth under capitalism would be undermined due to intensifying biophysical limits. A combination of diminishing returns from energy extraction and increasing costs of environmental crises are already undermining growth and require us to rewrite the global economic operating system, the scientists concluded in a powerful background report to the UN. Rewrite the global economic operating system, indeed. In two new peer-reviewed research papers published in June, their analysis goes further. Capitalism's drive for maximizing profits means that the economy is structured around continued economic growth. If it doesn't grow, it collapses. This means that huge technological efficiencies tend to empower capitalism to grow faster and faster, narrowing the window. The first study, published in Environmental Politics, points out that environmental impacts and resource use of many national economies is unsustainable. If the economy is to continue growing or even remain at the present level, in order to stay within the planetary boundaries of resource use, we have to decouple it from these environmental impacts. Yet the authors conclude that many of the decouple is such a nice word, accounting measures used to conclude that decoupling is happening systematically obscure or exclude critical data. The existence of decoupling in a bounded geographical area or economic sector does not, as such, mean that decoupling is happening in a wider context, argues the BIOS team. Well-known and widely studied phenomenon such as Jevons paradox, rebound, and outsourcing show that sectoral and local decoupling can coexist with and even depend on increased environmental impact and increased resource use outside the analyzed geographical or sectoral unit, they wrote. That's why when you see people talking about renewable energy going up in the UK, for instance, and how their economy is still growing, even though renewables are taking over, they're outsourcing a lot of their manufacturing to other places, and even food production to other places. So yeah, emissions might be going down in one area, or renewable energies might be going up in one area, but they're still using those resources from elsewhere. If their economy is still growing. In 1865, English economist William Stanley Jevons noted that technological improvements which increased efficiencies in coal use did not lead to a decline in coal consumption, but instead drove even greater consumption of coal in an even wider range of industries. So while decoupling can seem to occur in certain geographies or sectors, it can coexist with and even depend on increased negative impacts or resource use outside the analyzed sector or area. According to the BIOS authors, all too often greater efficiencies can translate into heightened environmental impacts because they enable greater levels of consumption at lower cost. Much of the data marshaled by McAfee and others in the analysis of the BIOS team would represent cherry picking from a narrow window that focuses on a particular region or sector without acknowledging the wider impacts outside the region or sector. As a result, much deeper environmental impacts of resource use can often be excluded from the analysis simply by narrowing down that data focus. I spoke to McAfee about the new research by the BIOS authors. He was skeptical of the findings. We seem to agree that specific cases of decoupling are indeed taking place, decoupling from carbon emissions, for instance. Where we disagree is that I see these instances of decoupling as a part of a wider trend that is only going to improve overall, although globally less developed nations still have to catch up. I asked McAfee about the conclusion that such decoupling is only relative and could be enabling increased resource consumption. In the United States, we have clear data on absolute decoupling, he said. I can highlight two key examples. Our fertilizer use and metals consumption have all undergone clear declines in recent years. This and other data provides unmistakable evidence that absolute decoupling in the U.S. is happening. Fertilizer consumption has undergone a real reduction, so I find it quite puzzling that they conclude there's no evidence of this. The data McAfee sent me did indeed seem to indicate declines in potash, sulfate, phosphate, and nitrogen use from around the 2000s onward, but his own data also complicated this picture, noting that total fertilizer use in U.S. agriculture has not declined overall. It first peaked around 2008, then declined for a few years before returning to and breaching 2008 levels in 2014. Figures from elsewhere offered a totally different picture. World Bank data shows that total fertilizer consumption per hectare in the U.S. has experienced an overall rise from 112.52 kilograms per hectare in 2002 to 138.6 kilograms per hectare in 2016. So why is he saying this? That's actually not true. And a U.S. Department of Agriculture study from that year finds no evidence at all of an absolute decline in energy or fertilizer consumption in U.S. agriculture since 2002. So where is he getting this data? Is he making it up? Economic anthropologist Dr. Jason Hickel from the University of Goldsmiths argues that McAfee has committed an accounting error which excludes the resources involved in extracting, producing, and transporting imported goods, as a huge amount of production is offshored indeed. That side of resource use has been conveniently shifted off their books. Right, we get, meat from Brazil and agricultural products from other places now. Right? We import a lot of our food from other areas. Yeah. I'm gonna switch to another article, guys. I'm gonna read a little more of this and switch it up. Iran McAfee stats by Bios's Teray Viden, lead author of the two new studies. He told me that finding isolated cases of absolute decoupling on specific things like horse manure, CFC gases, paper, etc., tells us very little of the overall metabolism. Usually, this sort of decoupling is only evidence of particular changes in methods of production and patterns of consumption. So if the U.S. uses less paper but exports more wood, including chips, for burning in the UK, this tells us little about the overall economic resource use of the country. That is why a geographically comprehensive and economy-wide perspective is needed for any evidence that has bearing on global absolute resource recoupling, which is the only ecologically sufficient goal. Yeah. You guys get the picture. You guys get the picture. Again, it's like saying, pointing to the fact that we have lessened, closed coal plants in certain countries, like the U.S. and the U.K. and in Europe. We're shutting down coal plants everywhere, but we're building more coal plants all over Asia. So, coal burning has doubled in the last decade globally. However, if you want to point to, look at all the look at all the good things we've done in the U.S. and the U.K. and Europe and other places, we're just offshoring, coal production or coal burning to other places that make our goods and our services and then ship them back to us. Yeah, the picture is decouple. Yes, yeah. Sorry about that, Poppy. Again, localizing everything, food production, energy production, clothing and housing, localizing everything is the only way we're going to even begin to fight this. And, so it would behoove everyone in this community and everyone who is aware of this to start speaking to people about, hyper regionalization or hyper localization, and getting off the grid or getting off the globalization hamster wheel that we're on. Creative experiments. Your Tesla car is mostly powered by coal, most likely. Anyways, we have 137 watching, 78 likes. Please like up the video. I'm going to cover one more article before we leave. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Lastly, business as usual porn, or we need to talk about collapse. This is from resilience.org, and this is from July 16th. I think we need to talk openly and calmly about the possibility of societal or civilizational collapse arising from humanity's present predicaments. And that's mostly what I want to pursue in this post. Not so much what the likelihood or the underlying mechanisms of collapse might be, but the idea that it would be useful if, as a society, we could talk about it. Indeed, maybe that's happening in one sense. The noise is off stage from scientists, multilateral agencies, social critics, and political activists about the possibility of collapse are getting louder, inevitably. So is the pushback from those arguing that this is so much overheated rhetoric and everything's just fine. My sense is that there's a far greater empirical weight behind the former than the latter position, but it's the latter one that seems to dominate public discourse. No, this new low in Arctic sea ice doesn't mean irreversible climate change. Certainly not. My sense is that there's far greater empirical weight behind the former than the latter position. I've read that. Let's see. There's precious little public and media attention to the rather big news that the way we live may soon be ending. Indeed, people who say such things are generally relegated from serious debate. see Michael Moore and Jeff Gibbs. They've been trying, we're trying to censor these guys, push them out. They're crazy people. They're eco-fascists. Sometimes accused of peddling collapse porn with their mawkish tales of impending doom. Or see Guy McPherson. It's a curious phrase, inasmuch as pornography presents people with something that they guiltily want to see, but in unrealistic and idealized ways that hide the reality of the relationships involved and erode their integrity. Perhaps we should rather be talking about business as usual porn. I'm not sure why business as usual porn is so widespread, but I think possibly it's because of the unfortunate fusion between two aspects of modern life. First, a sense that the vast technological reach of contemporary societies armors us against the malign contingencies of the world. And second, an elaborate and urbanized division of labor that denies most people even the remotest capacity to care for themselves in the face of those contingencies. The result at best is a cheerful fatalism. There's nothing I can do about it, so I might as well enjoy myself. And at worst, a kind of Stockholm syndrome in which we celebrate our armored urbanism, latch on to every sign of its vitality, and dismiss any counter-narrative out of hand. In his lovely book about foraging and hunting peoples, Hugh Brody describes a very different situation among the Inuit hunters with whom he lived. Every journey across the ice was rimmed with potential danger, which was freely acknowledged. The Inuit were well aware of the malign contingencies of the world over which they had little ultimate control, a situation that made them neither fearful nor selfish, nor angry nor sad, but in some sense alive within a culture that had to deal with it. And they had many skills for dealing with what came their way, as hunters, builders, navigators, craftspeople, and so on. My sense is that they didn't spend much time debating whether they were optimistic or pessimistic about their uncertain future, nor in honoring leaders who cheekily mocked Project Fear. Project Fear, I guess, and lambasted doomsters and gloomsters. Instead, they carefully assessed the dangers ahead that they perceived, prepared themselves as best they could to mitigate them, but were open to the inscrutable workings of uncontrollable contingency. My feeling is that we could do with channeling a bit of that mentality in our now challenged world. Again, this author, who is this author? Chris Smage. This author is echoing what I like to say, which is that we should import indigenous cultures or ways of living into our culture instead of exporting our way of living towards the world. Perhaps one of the differences between our predicaments today and those of the Inuit is that our problems are fundamentally collective. Often, in non-modern foraging or farming societies, centralization and bureaucratization has been a risk-pooling venture by people with other options up their sleeve. I'm borrowing here from archaeologists of pre-modern societal collapse, Joseph Tainter. When the going gets rough for the state superstructure, people readily abandon it and pursue a more dispersed and self-reliant life, perhaps something akin to the kind of life lived by the Inuit hunters described by Brody. One of the problems we face today is that for most of us, it's not so easy to walk away and lead a more self-reliant life. We lack the space, the skills, and the political warrant to do so. These are all genuinely difficult problems. Perhaps as big a problem is that we also lack the cultural language to do so. We've become so wedded to urbanism, economic growth, high tech, or in fact high-energy solutionism, and narratives of historical progress that a turn to self-reliance seems undesirable, impossible, laughable, what someone I was debating with recently called a neo-peasant fantasy. I guess I'll continue that debate warily. It seems to be a thing I do, and I haven't given up on it entirely. If I can help break down the resistance to an alternative cultural narrative in a few minds, then I guess that's something. But I want to imagine myself metaphorically out on the ice with Inuit hunters, as Hugh Brody was with no food, no game and evidence, and many days' journey from safety, with only a tired dog team. my knowledge of the terrain, my hunting skills, and my fortitude in my favor. Of course, in reality, I'm not out on the ice, but on a small farm near the edge of a small town in a small country that's thoroughly imbued with the culture of global capitalism. I can try to imagine a cultural awakening fit for my time and place, but to write it down on the page will make it thinner and more fugitive than it needs to be in practice. The words I write on the page would probably include things like autonomy, self-reliance, community, land, skill, care, craft, work, health, nature, play, creation, love, and argument. You can write those words for most cultures, but I think they'll soon mean different things in our culture than they do now. The trick is going to be building out quickly from the place where we are now, creating culture in practice, but letting go of a lot of what we now take for granted or insist upon. We need to build a new culture that's calmly open and alive to the possibilities and dangers of the present and the journey ahead, not angrily insistent upon the virtues of the path that took us to where we now stand. So I don't think it's worth spending too much time debating on paper or online, excuse me, the detailed shape and content of that new culture. I think it's better to shape it in practice by doing what we can as peacemakers, storytellers, educators, healers, or agents of the practical arts to breathe local life into it. But I do think it's worth spending time debating the political and historical circumstances in which that shaping can take off and propagate. Oh, sorry about that. Give me a second, guys. Going back. And that's why the inability to countenance collapse in mainstream discussion, our obsession with business as usual porn, is frustrating, because we need to talk about collapse. Business as usual porn also includes, guys, we're doing great. We're doing better than ever. We have more renewables than ever. We're on the right track. Everything's fine. No, this doesn't mean irreversible collapse. Or irreversible climate change or climate catastrophe, whatever you want to call it. No, guys, we're on the right path. Everything's going to be okay. We're just going to green our economy. We're going to have green growth forever. I'm not saying that everybody needs to agree it's inevitably going to happen, but I think it would be good if there was a wider acceptance in mainstream discussions that on the basis of the evidence before us, it's a reasonable possibility to reckon with, right? Just like Roger Hallam was saying, the idea that, we have a 10% chance of extinction is a wild idea to actually get your head around, right? And the fact that nobody wants to talk about that 10% chance is a huge problem. In fact, in our culture, we're able to countenance this and take it in stride. I'd probably downgrade my estimation of its likelihood. I'd liken my position to a tourist on a river rowboat, supping at the bar and enjoying the scenery as we float along. There's a distant roar, and on the horizon I see a smudge of spray. The current has started running faster and grown sinuous. Coming up quickly on the far bank, there's a placid creek. Gosh, seems like there's quite a waterfall ahead, I say. Gosh, seems like there's quite a waterfall ahead, I say to my fellow passengers. One of them cups to her ear. Nah, I can't hear anything, she says. I really don't think so, another replies. The captain wouldn't put us into that kind of peril. Don't be such a killjoy, says a third. Carpe diem is my motto. I'm enjoying my drink. We'll all die in the end anyways. We'll be fine, says another. Somebody's soon going to figure out how to make some wings and fit them to the boat. If there's a waterfall, we'll just fly over it. All the same, I say, if we all get down onto the deck quickly and help the oarsmen, we might just be able to row into that creek. Then we're sure to be in safer waters. Are you serious, says another passenger? I didn't pay for this holiday just to be going back to doing a load of backbreaking work. But privately unsettled by my words, the passengers seek reassurance. Don't worry, I know his sort of alarmist very well, says Captain Schellenberger, nodding in my direction. Hilarious. I'd like to apologize on his behalf. Just look how beautiful the river is right here. And it's even better up ahead. Now, who wants another drink? I'm not really going down with Ted Kaczynski's ship of fools, but despite the captain's words, I'm pretty sure we're in for a rude awakening. Unfortunately, with everyone on board so deeply into their business as usual porn, there's not much I can do about it. And what I don't know as the current curtain of spray approaches is whether we're just going to bump down and lurch uncomfortably around in the rapids for a while, or whether we're going to fly over a precipice and be dashed on the rocks hundreds of feet below. A reviewer of John Michael Greer's latest offerings writes that many people today succumb to the odd fallacy that collapse will be fast, when we know from past social collapses that they're usually slow. In this view, intimations of fast collapse are another version of business as usual porn, because they suggest there's nothing to be done. We're screwed. Might as well just have another drink. I understand the concept of slow collapse. Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of Rome in 800 AD. Long after anything that truly resembled the Roman Empire had ceased to exist. And Byzantines were still calling themselves Romans around that time. I dare say people might still be calling themselves American or English in centuries hence. But Charlemagne and the Byzantines didn't have to contend with rapid global temperature and sea level rises, whose expected upper bounds are at the kind of levels we know caused mass extinctions in the geological past. Slow extinctions, no doubt, as measured by human years, but also not ones enmeshed in the fragile interdependencies of complex civilization. Even then, it's worth considering what collapse might look like as it happens, not necessarily a Mad Max world of anarchic violence, but maybe a slow unraveling of political order and economic well-being of the kind that already seems underway. And even if future climate disruptions prove only modest, there are numerous other political, economic, and biophysical crises looming that suggest change to business as usual is imminent, however much the status quo gratifies some of us. Can you say coronavirus? When I wrote something similar a few years back, one of the captain's crew responded along the lines that you can almost hear Smage wringing his hands with his fears about the future. But I'm not frightened. We need to jettison these dualities of optimism and pessimism, hope and fear. Optimism to hang onto a world where half the population live in rank poverty. No thanks. I think we need to cultivate something of the insouciance about a rapid change of circumstances of the Inuit, or of those pre-modern citizenries described by Tainter, who shrugged and walked away. So where I think we need to be is out on the ice, my belly empty and my eyes open, attentive for prey. By that, I don't mean that personally I'm fully prepped up for the contingency of a Mad Max world, nor that my hands are unsullied by any traffic with the capitalist present. I mean that I want to be outside the tent, surveying the terrain, not inside the tent, telling tall tales about the rich hunting grounds we're sure to find just as soon as we step outside. Excuse me. Can't even read this article. To return to my other metaphor, I think there's a good chance that when the boat slips over the edge, it's going to be worse than just bumpy. To me, that's not an inducement to have another drink, but one to quit the bar, get down on the deck, and start rowing. To do that, though, we first need to kick the porn habit and start talking properly about collapse. That was a really great article. I hope you all enjoyed that one. Well done, well written, and a great argument that you don't have to fully be like pants on fire. Oh my God, but maybe, at least allow the idea of collapse into your mind. Hey guys, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and you can support the channel. The links below, PayPal, Patreon, Square. Also, if you'd like to watch the live streams, you can watch the live streams on my Patreon channel. You can subscribe for as little as $1. So hopefully I will see you over there, and thanks so much.